She didn't just break my heart. She lit it on fire and laughed while it burned. My name is Archer Davidson. I'm 61 years old, 30 years in the Army, retired now. I've got the broad shoulders of a man who spent his life carrying weight, both literal and otherwise. My hair's mostly gray, clothes cropped like it always was, and the ink on my arms has faded, but the memories behind them haven't. Civilian life is foreign territory, and I navigate it the only way I know how: discipline, routine, control. Most mornings, I find myself at Joe's Diner, same booth in the corner. Black coffee, eggs over easy, toast, no butter. The old-timers who weren't in the service sit near the window, talking football and grandkids. The vets, the ones who know the price of things, take their seats with their backs to the wall, just like I do. I'd never been the kind of man to ignore details. It's why I made it through deployments, why men listened when I spoke. That's why I noticed the changes in Elsa long before she thought I did. The new perfume, floral, something she'd never worn before. The sudden interest in working late, the way she smiled at her phone. At first, I ignored it, chalked it up to boredom, maybe some new distraction. But then it was the bank statements. Charges at a hotel outside town, a restaurant I'd never taken her to. "Archer, you're acting paranoid," she said one night, tucking her hair behind her ear like she always did when she lied. "It's just dinner with the girls. You know how it is." I didn't answer, just nodded. She thought she was winning. The next morning, I drove down to the tech repair shop on Main Street. The place smelled like burnt circuits and old coffee. Eli Quinn sat behind the counter, tall, lanky, face half-lit by the glow of a monitor. Always wore a hoodie, even in the Texas heat. Smart kid, bit of an asshole, but good at what he did. "I need you to pull some phone records," I said, sliding Elsa's old laptop across the counter. Eli pushed his glasses up. "This legal?" I stared at him. He got the message. "All right," he muttered, cracking his knuckles. "Let's see what we've got." 15 minutes later, I had my answer. Calls at midnight. Messages deleted, but not gone. And a name, Heath Jenkins. The ex. The one she swore was just a memory. I clenched my jaw, looking at the screen. It wasn't anger. Anger was loud, reckless. What I felt was cold, precise. I'd been played for a fool. That wasn't a feeling I entertained for long. Eli glanced at me. "You want the texts too?" "No," I said, standing. I already knew enough. He smirked. "Good. Because some of them are real stomach-turners." I left without another word, walking out into the afternoon sun, letting the heat press against me. Elsa had been careful. Careful enough to keep it quiet, but not careful enough to cover her tracks. She had a pattern, and patterns could be predicted. At dinner that night, she set the table like usual, bright smile, fresh lipstick. "How was your day?" she asked, casual as ever. I picked up my fork, took my time cutting into the steak. "Uneventful." She laughed, relaxed, thinking she still had control. I let her. Let her think everything was fine. Let her keep smiling like nothing had changed. Because soon, she'd learn. The only thing worse than getting caught in a lie is realizing the person you lied to knew all along. The days that followed were quiet. I went to work as usual, put in my time at the security consulting firm I ran with an old Army buddy, came home, ate dinner. Elsa played her part well, too well. The smiles, the casual questions, the way she still sat close on the couch like she cared. But I knew now, and knowing changed everything. I watched her patterns. Thursday nights, she stayed late at work. Saturday mornings, she had errands that took longer than they should. Her phone, once left on the kitchen counter without a second thought, never left her side now. I let her think I was oblivious. That's the thing about people who cheat. They want to believe you're stupid. It makes them feel clever. On a warm Saturday afternoon, I stopped by Mrs. Adler's house 2 doors down. She sat on her porch like she always did, a thick book in her lap, reading glasses perched on her nose. She'd been a teacher for 40 years, the kind of woman who missed nothing. "Afternoon, Archer," she said, looking up. "You're not usually home this time of day." "Figured I'd check in on my favorite neighbor," I said, leaning against the porch railing. "You keeping busy?" She tapped the cover of her book. These days, books are better company than most people. She adjusted her glasses. "You holding up all right?" "Why do you ask?" She sighed, setting the book aside. "Because I've seen Elsa's car parked a few blocks over. Not at the store, not at the gym. Just sitting in front of a house where it doesn't belong." She looked at me, sharp eyes full of something close to pity. "You already know, don't you?" I nodded. She pursed her lips. "Thought so. You're not the kind of man to miss things." I stayed a while, talking about nothing important. Mrs. Adler had spent a lifetime reading people, and she knew better than to pry. By the time I walked home, the sun was dipping low, the sky stretching wide and red over Rivertown. Inside, Elsa was in the kitchen, humming to herself, stirring a pot of sauce like she had no worries in the world. "You hungry?" she asked without looking up. I pulled a beer from the fridge, popped the cap, leaned against the counter. "Yeah," I said, taking a sip. "Long day." She smiled, setting the spoon down. "Yeah? Anything interesting?" I watched her, the way she moved, easy, unbothered. It was almost impressive, the way she lied so effortlessly. "Same old," I said, setting the beer down. "How about you?" She hesitated, just for a second. Most people wouldn't notice it. But I did. "Oh, you know, the usual." The usual. That's what she called it. A man who wasn't her husband, a bed that wasn't ours. I nodded, taking another slow sip. "Good," I said. "Routine's important." She turned, looking at me a little too long, searching my face for something. Doubt. Suspicion. Anything. But I'd spent a lifetime learning how to keep my face unreadable. That night, I lay in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling while she slept. It was almost funny how at ease she was, like she had nothing to fear. But fear was coming. I wasn't a man who acted on impulse. I planned. I waited. And when the time was right, I executed. The next day, I made a call. Eli picked up on the third ring. "This about your wife?" "Yeah." He sighed. "Thought so. What do you need?" "Text logs. Locations. Times. Everything." There was a pause. Then a quiet chuckle. "You planning on killing the guy?" "No." I glanced out the window at the empty street, the afternoon heat shimmering off the pavement. "Just making sure they get what they deserve." Eli exhaled. "All right, give me a couple days." That was fine. I'd waited this long. A few more days wouldn't hurt. Besides, patience had always been my strongest weapon. Eli came through 2 days later. He slid a flash drive across the counter at the repair shop, leaned back in his chair, and cracked his knuckles. "It's all there. Texts, timestamps, location history." "She's not subtle." I pocketed the drive. I figured. "You sure you don't want to see the messages?" No, I didn't need the details. I'd seen enough men unravel over words that couldn't be unsaid. What mattered was the pattern, the evidence. He smirked. "Fair enough. You need anything else?" "Yeah," I said, crossing my arms. "What do you know about hidden cameras?" Eli's grin widened. "Now we're talking." Later that afternoon, I sat in my truck outside the cheap motel on the edge of town. The kind of place with a flickering neon sign and a parking lot full of beat-up sedans. Elsa's car was already there, parked in the back, tucked out of sight like that would make a difference. I checked my watch, took my time. Then I stepped out, walked across the lot like I belonged there, and slipped into the room next to theirs. The setup was simple. Eli had hooked me up with a discreet camera, small enough to fit inside the air vent. It was already recording by the time I stepped back outside. Now, all I had to do was wait. An hour later, I watched them leave from my truck, laughing, touching, moving like they had no reason to be careful. Heath Jenkins looked the same as he had in the old pictures Elsa kept in a shoebox. Square jaw, good hair, a smirk that had probably gotten him out of trouble more times than he deserved. He thought he'd won. He had no idea the war hadn't even started. That night, I sat at my desk at home, reviewing the footage. It was all there, clear, undeniable. Elsa smiling up at him, hands in his hair, the way she'd never touched me anymore. She hadn't just betrayed me. She'd been happy to do it. That was the part that burned. I closed the laptop and exhaled slowly. This wasn't about emotions. It wasn't about pain. It was about setting the battlefield, making sure my next move would be the last one that mattered. The next morning, I called Elsa's parents. "Hey, Archer." Her father, Bill, answered, voice gruff from years of smoking. "Everything all right? We need to talk," I said. Face to face. There was a pause, then a quiet sigh. "I'll tell Carol to put on coffee." That evening, I pulled into their driveway, stepping out onto the porch where Bill was already waiting. He was a retired machinist, hands still calloused, eyes sharp. He could read a man in 5 seconds, and he already knew this wasn't a social call. Inside, Carol had set out pie, but no one touched it. She folded her hands on the table, glancing between me and Bill. "What's going on?" I pulled out my laptop, opened the file, let the video play. Carol's breath hitched. Bill's expression darkened. The room was silent except for the sound of Elsa's laughter on the screen. When the video ended, I closed the laptop. No one spoke for a long moment. Bill exhaled through his nose, leaning back in his chair. Jesus Christ. Carol wiped at her eyes. Archer, I don't know what to say. There's not much to say, I replied evenly. But she's coming here for dinner tomorrow. I want you to keep this to yourselves until then. Carol swallowed hard, nodding. Bill studied me for a moment, then gave a slow nod. All right, he said. Whatever you've got planned, you let me know how I can help. I met his eyes. Just be here. That's enough. The next night, Elsa walked into her parents' house smiling, oblivious. Heath showed up 15 minutes later, wearing the same cocky grin he always had. They thought they were here for a casual dinner. They didn't realize the table had already been set for them in more ways than one. Elsa breezed into the house like nothing was wrong, kissing her mother on the cheek, greeting her father with a bright smile. She didn't even glance at me. Heath followed a few steps behind, casual as ever, hands in his pockets like he owned the place. I leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, watching the show. Didn't know we were having company, Elsa said, finally turning toward me. Her voice was light, but her fingers curled a little too tightly around her purse strap. Figured it was time for a family dinner, I said. Catch up. Talk about life. Carol's hand shook as she set the plates down. Bill didn't bother pretending to make small talk. Elsa, sensing something off, hesitated for the first time. Well, she said, forcing a smile, that's a surprise, but nice. Heath pulled out a chair, grinning. Yeah, man, always good to get together. He had no idea. We ate in silence, the tension thick. Elsa kept glancing at me, waiting for something, but I just cut my steak and took my time. Heath, too arrogant to read the room, kept trying to fill the silence. He cracked a joke about a crazy ex and how some women just can't let go. Bill's jaw flexed. Carol looked like she might be sick. Elsa just stared at her plate. I let the moment stretch, let them feel the discomfort before I finally spoke. I came across something interesting the other day. I pulled my phone from my pocket, tapped the screen. Thought it was worth sharing. The video played. Elsa's color drained. He sat back, the smirk vanishing as the audio filled the room. The laughter, the whispers, the moments they thought no one would see. Carol covered her mouth with her hands. Bill exhaled hard through his nose, shaking his head. The video ended. I set the phone down. No one spoke. Elsa swallowed hard. Archer, I held up a hand, stopping her cold. No excuses. No explanations. I already know. Heath looked from me to Bill, then back again, his confidence faltering. Look, man, you don't talk, I said, my voice flat. You don't get to say a damn word. He shut his mouth. Smart. Elsa's breath hitched, but I wasn't interested in tears or regret. She had her fun. She made her choices. Now, she lived with them. Carol shook her head, voice barely above a whisper. How could you? Elsa started, then stopped. She had nothing. Bill leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, eyes locked on his daughter. You humiliated yourself, Elsa. You humiliated us. Elsa blinked fast, looking at her mother for support, but Carol wouldn't even meet her eyes. Heath pushed back from the table, clearing his throat. All right, I think we should go. I smirked. No, you should go. I pointed at Elsa. She stays. Heath hesitated, like he was waiting for her to defend him. She didn't. He scoffed, shaking his head. This is bullshit. No, Heath, I said, calm and steady. This is consequences. For the first time that night, he had no comeback. He stood, glancing at Elsa one last time. She didn't move. He walked out without another word. The silence stretched long after the door closed. Elsa wiped at her face, trying to pull herself together, but there was nothing left to save. Archer, please. I stood, sliding a folded piece of paper across the table. Divorce papers. Already signed. Yours just need a signature. She didn't reach for them. It doesn't have to be like this. I met her eyes, steady. Yeah, it does. She didn't argue. She knew it was over. Bill pushed back from the table, shaking his head as he stood. You're not welcome here for a while, Elsa. You need to figure yourself out. Carol didn't speak, just wiped at her eyes and stood, walking away. I turned to leave, but Elsa grabbed my arm. Archer, I don't want to lose everything. I pulled free. You already did. Then I walked out, leaving her to sit in the wreckage of her choices. The house was too quiet now. Not that I missed Elsa's voice filling it, just the routine of knowing someone else was there. But routine was adaptable. It had to be. A man didn't spend 30 years in the army without learning how to rebuild. I spent the first few weeks tearing things down. Sold the house, bought a smaller place on the edge of town, a single-story ranch with a workshop out back. Needed work, but I didn't mind. Work kept the hands busy, kept the mind quiet. Hank, an old buddy from the VFW, came by one afternoon, leaning against the truck bed while I unloaded lumber. "Hell of a mess back there," he said, scratching his chin. "You holding up all right?" I stacked another board. "I've had worse." He smirked. "Yeah, I figured. You need a hand. Always." We worked in silence, the way men do. Built a new fence, reinforced the porch, took down an old shed that had more rot than structure. Every now and then, Hank would grunt and mutter something about Elsa, but I never responded. I wasn't interested in talking about the past. I was more interested in making sure it stayed behind me. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I got a text from Eli. FYI, she tried to call me. Didn't answer. Figured you should know. I stared at the message for a second, then typed back. Appreciate it. She was reaching out. I knew she would. I also knew I didn't care. Instead, I spent my time with the younger guys at the VFW. A few fresh veterans, just out, trying to figure out how to walk in a world that didn't wear uniforms. I saw the same look in their eyes that I used to see in the mirror, lost, restless, waiting for orders that weren't coming. One of them, a kid named Nate, sat across from me one night, picking at the label on his beer. "Don't know how you do it," he muttered. "Do what?" "Act like it doesn't get to you. The way people look at you. Like you're a museum piece." I leaned back, studying him. "You let them define you, they win." He scoffed, shaking his head. "Easy for you to say. You've got your shit together." I chuckled, low and dry. "You think that?" He frowned. "I mean, yeah." I took a sip, then set my beer down. "Listen, kid. Life's just another battlefield. You pick your ground, set your defenses, and when things go to hell, you adapt. Nobody's got it all figured out." He stared at the table, thinking. "So what do you do?" "Just keep moving." I nodded. "You keep moving. And you make damn sure the past doesn't drag you back." He exhaled, nodding slowly. Maybe he got it. Maybe he would. Later that night, I sat on the porch, looking out over the quiet stretch of land beyond the fence. The air was warm, thick with the scent of fresh-cut grass and earth. I didn't miss her. Not her laugh, not her touch, not the way she used to look at me before she stopped looking at me at all. What I missed, maybe, was the man I used to be before I let my guard down. That man was back now. Stronger. Smarter. And he wasn't looking back. A few months passed. The days settled into a new rhythm. Work, rebuilding the house, nights at the VFW, mornings at Joe's Diner where the coffee was strong and the conversations were easy. My name didn't come up in whispers anymore. Elsa's did. That was her cross to bear. One afternoon, I was working on the porch steps when a familiar car pulled into the driveway. I didn't need to see the driver to know who it was. Elsa stepped out, hesitated, then smoothed her skirt and walked toward me like she had something rehearsed in her head. I didn't stop working. Didn't even acknowledge her until she cleared her throat. "Archer." I drove the nail in, set the hammer down, and finally looked at her. She looked good, better than she should, considering how things had fallen apart for her. Hair done, makeup on, like she wanted to prove something. "What do you want?" She flinched a little, like she expected something softer. I wanted to talk." I wiped my hands on a rag and leaned against the railing, waiting. She shifted her weight. "I messed up. I know that." I said nothing. I wasn't thinking. I got caught up in something that wasn't real, and she sighed, wrapping her arms around herself. "I lost everything." I let the silence stretch. She wanted me to fill it, to say something that would make this easier. But I wasn't in the business of making things easy anymore. She swallowed hard. "I miss you, Archer." I studied her, slow and steady. Once, those words might have meant something. Now, they were just noise. "No, you miss what I gave you. Stability. Security. Someone who put up with your shit." She looked down. I was stupid. I nodded. "Yeah, you were." Her breath hitched, and for a second, I thought she might cry. But that wasn't my problem anymore. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, voice small. "Good," I said. "Because I don't." She looked up at me then, searching for something, anger, regret, maybe some part of me that wanted to take her back. But there was nothing left. She saw it. I knew she did. Finally, she sighed, shoulders slumping. "I should go." I nodded, stepping past her to grab another board. "Yeah." You should. She lingered for a moment, then turned and walked back to her car. I didn't watch her leave. I had work to do. That night, I sat on the porch with a whiskey in hand, the air thick with the scent of fresh cut wood and summer heat. The stars stretched wide above me, endless and quiet. My world was smaller now, but it was mine. I'd build it with my own hands, on my own terms. No ghosts. No weight I didn't choose to carry. In the end, she was just a chapter, not the whole damn book. And I was already writing the next one. A week later, I got a call from Bill. Figured you should know, he said, his voice rough like gravel. She's moving. I didn't ask where. Didn't care. That's so? Yeah. Some apartment in the city. She's saying it's a fresh start. But between you and me, she's got nothing left here. I nodded to myself. That's her problem. He chuckled, low and dry. That it is. There was a pause. Then, softer, you all right, Archer? I glanced out at my land, the fence I'd rebuilt, the house that felt more like home now than it ever had. Yeah, I said, meaning it. I'm good. Glad to hear it. He hesitated. Carol still asks about you. She's a good woman, I said. Tell her I appreciate it. I will. We hung up, and that was the last I thought about Elsa. The next few months, I kept busy. The house came together, solid and strong. The VFW guys started swinging by more, lending a hand, sharing a drink. Nate got a job at the security firm, finally settling into something that kept him grounded. Hank and I started a weekend ritual, working on the truck, shooting the shit, no mention of the past, just moving forward, the way men do. One night, after a long day of work, I found myself back at Joe's diner, same booth in the corner. The coffee was still terrible, the air still thick with the smell of bacon grease and old stories. Eli slid into the seat across from me, smirking. So, you finally gonna let me update your phone? Are you still living like it's 1995? I took a sip of coffee. If it works, it works. He shook his head, flagging down the waitress. You're a lost cause. I just chuckled. Mrs. Adler passed by on her way out, stopping at my table. Archer. Ma'am. She peered at me, sharp as ever. You look lighter. I nodded. Because I am. She smiled, approving. Good. You deserve that. As she walked out, I leaned back in my seat, letting the moment settle. The weight was gone. The past was exactly where it belonged. And me? I had my coffee, my work, my land, and my life back. That was more than enough.